Welcome to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara, week 32.
Hello.
We have just watched episode 153, original air date Monday, March 4th, 1985. Sophia shows her face to Mason, and her hair, really.
Mm-hmm.
He is shocked. She thought that he might be figuring it out, but he says no, he had no idea. And then he lets it be known that he's not too happy with her return, let alone her overall. She thought that they always got along well when he was younger, but he said, if it weren't for you, my parents would have gotten back together.
Mm-hmm.
And my siblings, including Channing, would never have been born. So he refuses to help her see Kelly. And she says, well, I'll do it without your help then.
He also asks how many people know about her identity.
And she only mentions Eden. Or he figures out Eden.
He guesses Eden. I thought it was interesting. She didn't mention Lionel.
Yeah, this may be for a future question session. Because he says he has more questions, but he's called into a meeting with the mayor and police chief, I think it is, or something like that. So...
And Warren as well, she doesn't mention. So.
Or Cruz.
Or Cruz, yeah.
He says, it looks like the Capwell family roller coaster is about to go off the tracks. Marcello hypnotizes Kelly to come and see him later in room 101 at the Capwell Hotel. A Capwell employee tells him when he gets there that his new office is ready and it's room 101 as he requested. Sophia tells him that Mason knows he's alive, and he says, well, let's stop it with the disclosures from now on. Ted has planned Joe's memorial service. Gina tries to plan a reception, but Ted says that Kelly wouldn't want it, so she backs off. Cece wants Kelly to move back into the house. Kelly is annoyed that they're all treating her like she's sick. So she's kind of had it with all of her family members. A phone call comes in from Marissa, but Kelly doesn't feel like she can take it because she blames herself for Joe's death. Mason and Cece actually agree on something, that being with family is the best thing for Kelly.
Yeah.
Then Kelly suddenly says she has an appointment. She's kind of hiding her appointment with Marcello just because she's kind of been hypnotized into having that appointment. But gets Eden to drive her, and Eden is annoyed when she finds out it's a meeting with Marcello, because there's a workman just putting his name on the door when she gets to room 101.
And I think Eden is suspicious, probably not only because she's suspicious of Marcello and she can't really remember her meeting with him. But I think just the way Kelly is framing this meeting, she says, I have to meet someone at 1 o'clock, someone important, I have to go. And, that's not usually the way a person would describe having an appointment. So
now, Eden's been asking him, Marcello, what are you doing with Kelly? And he doesn't tell her, so I wonder if Eden is going to put all the various things together and realize that Marcello is hypnotizing people left and right.
Well, there may be something that triggers her to remember a little bit more about her first meeting with him. I don't know much about hypnosis and how long the effects last, or if something can trigger someone out of it. But I think that might be a possibility.
Now, before he goes in with Kelly, Marcello lists all his credentials for Eden, and says he's currently on staff at the Antwerp Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Too bad they didn't have time to get Peter Flint in there. Eden asks him if Sophia was with him when she ran into him in Europe, and then if so, why didn't she reveal herself? So she's very suspicious, and Marcello basically says, well, Kelly's waiting for me in there. I can't answer any more of these questions. And Sophia shows up dressed as Contessa Armonti, and she asks him all about Marcello, and she says he's a very famous psychiatrist, and his techniques are very well respected. So I think, if Cruz has already checked him out, Eden should know all this.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sophia says she's glad that Kelly is seeing him. So Eden doesn't really believe her about Marcello's credentials.
Yeah.
And then she says, to kind of drive it home to Eden, she says, Marcello saved my life. I might still be institutionalized if not for him. So this makes me think that Sophia was in an institution, whether it was the one in Alaska, which now seems like an unlikely place, or somewhere in Europe, and Marcello was a doctor there, and maybe that's how they met. Maybe that's how she met the whole Armonti family to begin with.
Yeah, and I think this is perhaps the first time Eden has an inkling that her mom has spent time in an institution. And yeah, I mean...
Yeah, she said she was hospitalized, but she may have glossed over exactly the nature of that.
Yeah, and I think it does add a little more credence to an idea we've already discussed, which is that Marcello might have been Sophia's doctor or involved in her care. And now that we know a little bit more about Marcello's background, it seems possible that this might be something he laid out to, bring Sophia Capwell into the family's orbit. But it also, knowing a bit more about Marcello's background, I think, makes a lot of his story a bit more suspicious, because if he remembers his family being killed protecting CC, then what is his relationship with Sophia's former husband, the Count?
I'm thinking either an uncle or something that took him in after his parents were killed, or if he was a war orphan, he was taken in by a random family, which would explain it being a non-German family. So yeah, I guess that's something that will be clarified, whether he really is blood related to Count Armonti in some way, or was adopted at some point.
Yeah.
Eden and Cece have a phone call, and Cece tells Eden he's going to have Marcello thoroughly checked.
We both snickered a bit at this.
And then Eden tells him Cruz already has, which might be a risky thing, because Cece might then say, oh, well, then I won't bother. And then he can blame Cruz for it all when everything falls apart.
I don't think it's as easy for him to blame Cruz as it is for him to blame Mason, just because Cruz doesn't wear it the way Mason does.
It actually would be fitting for him to not blame Cruz for the exact same thing that he blamed Mason for. But, yeah, it's interesting. If Cruz has already checked out Marcello, clearly he didn't go back to his childhood, or he would know, some of those details. Maybe he did, and didn't think it was relevant that he was, living with the Count Armonti, who was not his father. I don't know.
Well, and I guess we'll learn more about this as we go along, but I don't know what records would have been like back then if someone was taken in by a family, sort of in the aftermath of war, when you have a lot of government structures that have kind of been destroyed and need to be rebuilt. I don't know necessarily how much paperwork there would have been, or just what there would be to discover in that.
I know my mom's family lost their house, and they were just put up in some random people's barn for like a year until they could get into place. Gina talks to Mason about Hank's impending release, which, if you remember, is scheduled for a day before the wedding, which is it March 8th?
Something like
that. It's coming up. Mason says to her that she'd have a better chance of getting Cece to accept Hank, or at least her former association with Hank, if they were already married. So she says that Cece would be suspicious if she tried to move up the wedding. And he says, well, that's his recommendation. So then later Gina comes up with a way, and it works very well. She says, to Cece she'd like to do more for Kelly, but she still feels like an outsider to the family.
Mm-hmm.
Which you'd think Cece would say is silly, but he actually says, "Oh, you're right. There's no reason we can't move up the wedding. We should elope." Which is exactly the kind of thing Gina was hoping for. I don't think she expected it to happen that quickly.
Her eyes light up.
Yeah.
Now, my assumption with Mason playing this angle is that the sooner Cece and Gina can get married, I would assume once they're married, Cece can't go back and proclaim Sophia dead. Is that it?
Well, the marriage to Gina would be invalid because he's still married to Sophia.
Right.
Which I guess means her marriage to the Count is invalid too.
Mm.
Which I guess since he's dead isn't really that relevant.
Yeah.
I wonder if Mason is kind of helping Gina move up the wedding because he realizes that the Sophia thing could blow up on its own, and Mason would rather be the one to reveal it to Cece. So the sooner the wedding happens, the less likely it is that Sophia's being alive has already spread to more people.
Well, would it also be a case, too, that the more time Cece has to prepare for his wedding, if you think of the possible checklist, the more time there is for another lawyer or someone to say, and make sure you've declared Sophia dead.
Mm-hmm. Or have a copy of the death certificate.
Yeah.
He might tweak to that. Yeah, that's a good point. Marcello helps Kelly during their session get something straight in her head, and he's really very good.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He's probably, like when you see psychiatrists on TV, like that one on Mad About You, they never really offer advice. They just get the person to come to a conclusion on their own. But maybe it's Marcello being German, but he basically says, nope, you should do this, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't think this way, these things shouldn't be in your life. And he just straightens her out really quickly in just a few short minutes. That really does jibe with what everyone's saying about him being a respected and successful psychiatrist. So, other than the dodgy hypnotism, we're pretty impressed, I think, with Marcello's skill there. He tells her that she needs someone to talk to who's not a family member, i.e. him.
Mm-hmm.
So after the appointment, Eden takes Kelly home to Sally's apartment, and Marcello's helped her get over her reticence to call Marissa, to talk to Marissa. So she gives her a call, and they have a nice conversation, and she says, Marissa wants to meet after the memorial service so we can talk about Joe.
Yeah.
So... already a positive result in just one session. Well, one proper office session.
Well, we're also seeing now the positive results of not having Peter Flint in her life. This is the first time we've ever seen Kelly without the threat or the influence of Peter. And she can actually just go and have coffee with someone without having to worry about her safety.
Yeah, we haven't really seen anyone else in the town breathe a sigh of relief that the Carnation Killer is dead. I'm thinking of like that landlady of his that Veronica encountered that one day. They had a conversation like you would expect people in a town that was scared of a serial killer would have. We haven't really seen normal people, except maybe at the hospital, but they were probably pretty busy. It'd be interesting if we hear, we haven't heard about people recovering from the earthquake for a long time. The assumption is the city's back to normal, and I guess, we'll see if we hear people reminiscing about the serial killer that was finally stopped. Then Sophia has a flashback of Marcello hypnotizing Kelly that we've seen before. Eden. And I think it's something that Eden said to her that makes her think maybe Marcello does have some other ulterior motive other than helping me.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because I didn't think she had enough information to really to start thinking that. But I don't know.
It does definitely raise the possibility that Marcello's been using Sophia's own vulnerabilities, and perhaps under the guise of treatment has been manipulating her as well.
Has he been hypnotizing Sophia, I wonder?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to suppress trauma. So after the appointment, Marcello gets out a little leather pouch and pours something from it into his hand. I imagine it being like a necklace or family ring or a coin or a medallion or something like that. We did not see it, though, because he put it in his hand. Didn't even look at it that long. He just kind of grasped it in his hand and looked off into space. This is after Eden told him that Cece wants to see him at 4 o'clock at the Capwell house. So he goes to Cece's study, and Cece wants to talk about money. And Marcello says, well, I don't want anything more than my normal fee. And then he tells Cece that the love of a parent inhibits communication. This is his way of getting Cece on board with his idea that Kelly needs someone other than family to talk to. And Cece is on board with that right away. He agrees.
And I wondered if maybe part of the reason Cece agrees quite readily is a conversation he and Mason have a little bit earlier in this episode where Mason says something like, well, you're always surprised when your kids are having problems. And, you never really deal with them that effectively. So maybe CC has decided that this is sort of the one time that he's going to take the advice of an expert and actually try to do what perhaps will work best rather than what he just assumes should happen.
Cece talks about the time Channing died and that Kelly was inconsolable then too. So Marcello had an odd look on his face when Cece said that, and so I was wondering if somehow maybe Marcello had hypnotized Kelly back then too. But then I realized Marcello was looking at Cece's war medals. He had about 4 or 5 medals in a little frame about letter-sized, and then he has his flashback to when his parents were murdered, a shortened version of that scene, just Cece with his hand over his mouth while his parents are being shot. So, kind of tunes out Cece during whatever Cece's saying to have that flashback and contemplate those war medals. So, we've yet to see how Marcello chooses to deal with the fact that, he blames Cece for killing his parents, basically. And I believe that's all we had this episode.
Yep, that was how the episode ended.
So, we will be back after we watch episode 154 of Santa Barbara. See you.
Bye-bye.
Since Peter Flint has left the show, and now Joe has left the show, do you want to revise your guesses as to who the next person to leave will be?
Well, I think with Joe gone, the days are numbered for the Perkinses, so I think perhaps Jade and Marissa will be the next ones to leave unless storyline can be found for them. I could see Amy maybe sticking around a little longer to, just sort of wrap things up with Brick. So that would be my guess there, unless you mean an actor or what else, maybe
an actor that's recast, you mean?
Yeah.
In which case, it'd be probably hard to guess.
Yeah.
Unless you can think of anyone who doesn't seem to be pulling their weight.
I mean, we haven't seen as much of Jade and Marissa as we did at the beginning. So that would be my best guess. The only other thought I might have would be, now that somehow Jackie has miraculously been reunited with Larry, it almost makes me think that perhaps the writers had planned to take her story one way and maybe have reconsidered that. So I think it's possible that they may just sort of fade away as well. Unless Jackie continues on as the teacher.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We have watched episode 154, which originally aired Tuesday, March 5th, 1985. So, the good news is Faux Perkins is gone, but the bad news is Joe Perkins is gone.
Mm-hmm. Been working on that for a while.
Yes. Cruz, Eden, Kelly, and Marcello are hanging around at the graveyard after Joe's funeral. And it looks like a completely new cemetery set. It's probably the poor part of the cemetery where people like the Perkinses get buried. Eden ends up catching a ride home with Marcello. She tries to avoid that a little bit, but ends up taking it. Cruz and Kelly just continue to hang around the gravesite, and Cruz tells Kelly a story about someone he once knew in high school, I guess, whose girlfriend died in a car accident, and he'd lamented to Cruz that he'd never told her that he loved her. And Cruz says to Kelly, at least you and Joe never had that problem. You don't have that regret. So I think he's trying to counter her stated regret that she didn't get to tell Joe what she wanted to because she didn't know he was dying. That seems to help her a little bit.
They also just reminisce about Joe. He talks about when they first met, and Joe defended him against some roughnecks who had originally been his friends.
Yeah, they exchange their best and worst stories about Joe. And, Kelly says that the worst is right now. And then they spot Peter Flint's headstone unexpectedly. Kelly says, why is it so close to Joe's? Cruz says he heard that they'd buried Peter that morning.
And it's just kind of a very plain little headstone.
Peter Flint in the years.
Yeah, not quite a pauper's grave. I guess maybe he had enough to pay for that little grave, but not much.
Back at the house, Eden asks Cruz at the graveyard before leaving to check on Marcello, but not to use his usual contacts. I guess she wants another angle on that. So later at the house, he tells her that he checks out. But his use of hypnosis in his therapy is considered controversial.
Yeah.
So this is Eden's first inkling of the hypnosis, so I suspect she'll very quickly put two and two together with regard to Kelly's treatment.
Yes, and you can see her thinking back to the time she first met him, too, because it really bothers her, I think, that she can't quite remember the details of it. So, yeah, she's putting things together.
Cruz and Eden end up kissing, and then Cruz says she wants to go home to his houseboat with him, but he says he's tired and he's just going to go to sleep, so he leaves alone. Then he comes back later, saying he couldn't sleep, but Kelly greets him at the door, and they end up hugging as Eden walks in, and you can tell that Eden is a little bit jealous about Kelly and Cruz. Suddenly.
She doesn't like that. And I almost wondered if that might be something Marcello would have hypnotized Kelly to maybe be a little more receptive to Cruz. Because when you think about it, if he gets Cruz out of the way, he's got Eden to himself. So I'm not saying that really was the case, but it did just cross my mind.
That's interesting. She ends up giving Cruz the cold shoulder when he tries to talk to her and says she's going to bed. So I think he knows that she's annoyed by that, but I mean, what's he going to do? Brick meets Larry.
Again.
Okay. Did they meet before?
Oh, no, sorry. I'm
So
thinking of Jeff.
Amy chases him away, and Amy realizes that Jackie and Larry haven't had any time together. So she suggests they go to an inn up north that she knows, and he gives them the number. And as Larry's using the payphone to make the reservation, a Navy man shows up, tells him his leave's been rescinded and he must go back overseas immediately. And this Navy guy has SP on his arm patch. I don't know what that means. Maybe the Navy version of military police. I don't know. So he's driving them back to the base, and Larry says, "Look, I haven't had a second alone with my wife on my leave. Can you just, go for a walk for half an hour?" And he agrees to do that. So they end up making out in the back seat for half an hour, and remember doing so in high school in Larry's 1965 Impala. And Jackie once again reiterates that she wants him to quit the Navy. And he says, yeah, they'll tell them that he's hanging it up for good.
I don't think anyone was more disappointed than Jackie to see Larry hold off his leave than I was, because I was really hoping that the two of them just go away together.
Amy, to try and distract you from Jackie, Amy runs into Elizabeth, who clarifies her relationship with Brick, tells Amy all about how Brick was helping her with Warren, and that she realizes that she mistook what she saw. So Amy calls Brick to tell him that she's been a jerk. Jeff arrives unexpectedly while she's expecting Brick, and tells Amy he's sterile, and probably has been all his life, and wants his $600 back.
And he's damn proud of it.
He is damn proud of it. Amy is very annoyed at this new stupid shenanigans, and tells him to get lost. He grabs her just as Brick arrives, and once again, Brick manages to punch out Jeff. Then we see Jeff at a payphone calling his doctor, saying he's going to need more proof. So he agrees to be tested again. So I think he's going to maybe take Amy to court for that $600 with all the proof of his sterility.
I was going to say this reminds me of someone we know, but it's too much information.
Marcello Amonti at home alone, or at the Capwell Hotel, room 101 or 301. He's looking in the mirror, talking to himself, possibly hypnotizing himself. He thinks that Kelly will soon escape her family, and that he will have the trust of all of them, but most of all C.C. Capwell. He opens the little leather pouch we saw before and pulls out the treasure, and it's dog tags with some... They seem to be quite old and maybe rusty, maybe burned. But they are the dog tags of Lieutenant Channing C. Capwell, United States Air Force. So he's had CC's dog tags with him the whole time, so he can't possibly have been surprised to find it was the same CC Capwell. Don't you think?
No, I feel like he's been planning this and plotting this for a long time.
Well, then why was he constantly telling Sophia, let's go back to Europe? That's kind of weird.
Well, that's true too, yeah.
I mean, if he's the guy who bunked Joe on the back of the head that one time, half a year ago, and he must have been, it's weird that he didn't, try to take any revenge against Cece then. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be that the dog tags are, sort of something he takes with him as a sort of talisman, and, whenever he needs a bit of fire in his belly, looks at those, and they spur him on to ever greater feats in his profession, perhaps.
He says, soon I'll be able to return it to you, and everything, along with everything else you deserve. So, hope Cece's background check is thorough.
Mm-hmm.
He might discover a potential problem in his future.
Cruz has done several background checks on him and hasn't come up with anything, so...
Yeah, he didn't... Eden does mention something like any skeletons in his closet or something that he's hiding, but Cruz says no. So I think that he didn't dig very far back. So. And that is it for this episode. So we'll be back after we watch episode 155 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
Antonio Fiorno was a happy-go-lucky young fellow who enjoyed life in the sunny climes of Miami, Florida, where he worked in a spa of sorts. His boss wished him well as he headed west to seek his fortune in sunny California. Despite having no teaching credentials, Antonio's natural charm won over the headmaster of Lyman Prep School. Perhaps he had once been a satisfied client at the spa at which Antonio had worked, and felt a paternalistic inclination to help facilitate Antonio's career. Peter Flint, as Antonio was now known, was given the job of physics teacher at Lyman. Peter was lucky to have many beautiful girls in his class, but none beguiled the hapless physics teacher so much as Kelly Capwell. Kelly, however, was set to elope with Joe Perkins, so Peter looked the other way when Kelly's brother Channing was murdered and Joe wrongly accused and sent to prison. Now Peter and Kelly could begin their life together. After 5 happy years, they started to plan their wedding. Unfortunately, Joe Perkins was granted parole, and Kelly was unable to keep from falling in love with him again. Sadly, Peter's brain was injured during a disagreement with Joe, and the resulting aneurysm led to a series of unfortunate events that culminated in Peter being shot to death by a rookie cop with an itchy trigger finger. Peter Flint was buried early one morning before any of his loved ones could make it to the cemetery. A few short hours after Peter Flint was laid to rest in Santa Barbara Cemetery, his archenemy Joe Perkins had his second funeral. Joe Perkins was the oldest of the 3 Perkins children. His mother worked in the cafeteria at the prestigious Lyman Preparatory School, and so he, the son of a blue-collar oil rig worker, was able to attend a school alongside the children of Santa Barbara's elite. There he met Kelly Capwell, daughter to his father's employer, oil tycoon, and hotel magnate C.C. Capwell. They soon fell in love and planned to elope. Little did they know that her physics teacher, Peter Flint, was also in love with her, and when Kelly's brother Channing was murdered, and Joe suspected of the murder, Peter withheld the fact that he knew Joe didn't kill Channing, and let Joe go to jail. When, after 5 years, Joe was unexpectedly paroled, he arrived back in Santa Barbara to claim the love of his life, only to find that she had moved on with Peter Flint. With the aid of his mysterious ally Dominic, he was able to clear his name and win back Kelly. Unfortunately, a brain injury, combined with his love for Kelly, drove Peter Flint mad, and while attempting to stop Peter from killing members of the Perkins family, Joe was shot by Peter. Joe succumbed to his injuries in the hospital the following day, and joined the many victims in Santa Barbara Cemetery, who would not have been there if not for Kelly Capwell.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 155 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Wednesday, March 6th, 1985. Lionel's asleep, and Augusta tries to quiz him about the Contessa while he's half waking up. She wonders if he knows it's Sophia.
I think she's trying to tap into his unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Lionel is livid to find out that Brick has been handling the family's stocks. He gets a call from their stockbroker, I guess, or their whatever the person is. Mason visits Sophia, but he knocks on the door, and she says, "Who is it?" And he goes, "It's your stepson, mother dear." Where we see him just, walking from the elevator, but we only see his feet. So
Yeah.
At first I thought it was Marcello's voice, too. He did a pretty good impression. She lets him in. He says, "It's your other stepson." He gives her a gift and then peppers her with questions.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just too overwhelmed with all the questioning to even answer one of them. So he goes, well, let's try another tact here. I'm going to call everyone who's involved in. So he calls Eden and tells her to come over and says, oh, by the way, who else knows Sophia's alive? She says, well, Lionel. So then he calls Lionel over too.
And this, of course, is just as Lionel and Augusta are trying to fire Brick.
Amy has trouble getting a job. Brick brings over a picnic basket. And then Brick is called back to the Lockridge house, where Augusta and Lionel interrogate him about his work on the Lockridge finances.
Mm-hmm.
They try to fire him, but he says they can't, because Minx is the one who hired him.
And I'm really looking forward to the next episode with Minx in it.
Brick says that he's, single-handedly turned around the family's finances, and Lionel says, no, that was my painting find that did that. So then Brick takes Amy to see Dr. Montclair. Now, interesting, IMDb, unless I totally am mistaken, had her last appearance as her final appearance, but suddenly she's back again. I'm pretty sure it's the same actress. But she introduces us to Dr. Renfro, a specialist from Boston, who's shown up out of the blue and has agreed to monitor Amy's condition for free. Amy wasn't even sure that her condition needed monitoring, but I guess she's not going to turn down a free doctor. And Dr. Renfro asks Brick if he's the father. And Brick says no, and they leave, and then, as we suspected all along from the slightly suspicious existence of Dr. Renfro, he makes a call to a mysterious person and says, I've made contact with the Perkins girl. She's agreed to be my patient. Everything's right on schedule. So we both figured that Dr. Renfro is actually working for Jeff, and that he is somehow going to try and, I don't know, maybe test Amy's baby to see if Jeff is really the father, or something like that. That's what we kind of talked about when he first came on. I don't know if you changed your mind by the end of the episode.
Well, that still seems like the likely suspect. It just seems like a lot for $600.
Well, if this were Days of Our Lives, some supervillain would have implanted Amy with his seed, and and Dr. Renfro would be like Dr. Rolf, overseeing everything.
Yeah, I guess so.
It seems odd if it was something like that.
Given that this doesn't seem to be where the show is at right now.
And it's a weird plot for Amy.
Yeah.
One of the people from the Down to Earth family.
Yeah, it is. It's, well, Amy often seems to get odd plots. Like, all the plots involving Amy have been a bit odd. But, yeah, I think Jeff is the most likely character. I think that's why they keep sort of bringing him back in to be obnoxious and then sort of sending him off again. But it does, as I say, it seems like a lot for $600, especially since Amy's not really asking for anything from him. So,
I mean, I could only assume Dr. Renfro's a friend of his.
Yeah, because it's a very
was
expensive
already going to
thing.
be in Santa Barbara for some other reason. I don't know.
Yeah, it is actually, it's more of a plot line that one would maybe expect from one of the Capwells, rather than, an Amy Perkins kind of.
Because if there was some sort of blackmail to be involved, or ransom of some kind, you would think a Capwell or a Lockridge would be better suited to pay a ransom.
Or if you think about the kind of thing that, as far as we know, went on with Santana, that was a lot of sleight of hand, but involving a very rich person handing off a baby to another very rich person. So this is a very different kind of situation. So I don't know.
Well, I guess we'll see. Amy, well, first Brick asks Amy to move into the rooming house where he lives. And she declines, but then she suggests that he could rent Joe's old room. Barely buried Joe, and now she's renting out his room.
Yeah,
so,
she's running a boarding house.
I guess Marissa is the one who he has to ask, but that'll be interesting.
Now, I would assume that in a way that would probably be a welcome source of income for Marissa, who's really subsisting on her salary as a lunch cook at Lyman. So.
And when John was leaving her, he had kind of said she couldn't really afford to live on her own. So, with Joe dead too, yeah, I imagine the next time we see Brick, he'll be living there. We might not even see Marissa.
Yeah.
They seem to have sidelined Marissa and Jade quite a bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate because I do like those two characters.
Augusta finds out that Mason is at the Capwell Hotel because she is suspicious of the phone call that Lionel got. She goes there to the presidential suite to spy on Mason, but just manages to miss all the interesting stuff of people arriving. And then she calls those thugs that she hired in episode 1 to get rid of Joe Perkins and says they need to get rid of Sophia the same way.
So first of all, it didn't actually work at all with Joe Perkins. So
she does mention that. She tells them they better do a better job of things. Inside the suite, of course, Mason, Eden, and Lionel all tell Sophia the same thing, that the best thing would be for her to go back to Italy.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. Without letting Sophia explain anything really to Mason, they come up with this plan. I don't want her to see Tad, Kelly, or CC, by the way, on the way out of town.
Mason kind of does his thing of, making the decision and kind of moving it along through.
He picks up the phone, calls the front desk, and says, Miss Armonti is checking out today. Please have her bill prepared. So later at home, Augusta asks Lionel what Mason and Eden wanted from him. And he said, they just really wanted to apologize for all the trouble they put me through these last couple months. And Lionel says, Augusta says, well, if you're going to lie to me, then that is what it is.
Yeah.
So she does not believe that. And of course, she knows that's not true. She didn't actually overhear anything. If she just put her ear to the door, she would have heard that they all knew it was Sophia. So,
there was one point in this episode where we have this guy come up with a big trolley full of food. And I was hoping so much that Augusta was hiding under the trolley.
I thought the same thing, because we don't see Augusta in the hallway. We see a guy come off the elevator with the tray, and it's got one of those, not tarps, tablecloths that goes all the way down to the ground. And I thought, I bet Augusta's hiding under there.
Yeah.
And I was very disappointed when she was.
Yeah, I was actually hoping Augusta would find a way to burst in on that little summit, because that would have just added another kind of wacky spark of energy to, a scene. When you think about it, these three characters really don't get along, any of them, with each other. And for them all to be at this sort of meeting in agreement with each other was quite extraordinary.
It's too bad Augusta doesn't know about the secret room either. So I guess, having not had a chance to talk to Marcello, Sophia decides that she's going to go have lunch off-site. So she has a car brought around. And, of course, Augusta's men show up first, and they kidnap her. And that is how it ends, with Sophia being kidnapped by the bad thugs that shot at Joe Perkins all those months ago.
And I just have a feeling that this is going to boomerang back somehow. And, Sophia almost seemed convinced that she should leave, and I just have a feeling this is going to somehow convince her that she shouldn't leave.
Or something will happen.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly, that will make Sophia's being alive publicly known.
Yeah.
Totally out of everyone's control, all because of the way Augusta arranged it, not realizing that Sophia was already planning to leave town.
That's right.
She'd overhear the conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I think I mentioned to you as we were watching, this is not the Dr. Renfro I remember.
Yeah.
And checking with IMDb, he's only credited on this one episode. So the next time we see him will be the recast of the one I remember.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of a series of doctors whose name starts with R.
Oh.
Wasn't the one in Mexico Dr. Ramirez?
Yes, he was.
And we have a Dr. Rawlings coming up in the future. I think maybe someone writing Santa Barbara just really liked Dr. R names.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this was a good Dr. Renfro, though. He looked immediately evil the minute we saw him. So.
Yeah, he was pretty creepy.
So, yeah. And we'll see when he actually returns and exactly what the nature of his interest in Amy is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So hopefully it will be an exciting storyline.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the last ones, really, so far, Amy has not been well served by her storylines.
The only good thing she ever did was that day and a half she worked for Peter.
Yeah.
Where that was interesting, mainly because Peter was in it.
And of course, when she was first introduced, and we had, for a little tiny bit, the entire Perkins family together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else?
Not that
we're hoping for Mix to come back soon.
Yeah, I really want to see that confrontation between her and Lionel and about Brick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I assume some of the cast had some vacations because we didn't see Lionel and Augusta for quite a number of days in a row, and now Cece's been talked about a lot, but not on screen very much in the last couple of weeks. He was there in one of the Palm Springs episodes, but I think they've just talked about Cece, and then Mason, of course, was in the attic during the siege at the Perkins house, but not actually on screen. So they must have been working some actors' vacations around some of those episodes, perhaps. All right, we'll be back after we watch episode 156 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've watched episode 156, originally aired Thursday, March 7th, 1985. And before we talk about that, we had a few deaths in the last few days. Lee Philip Bell, creator of The Young and the Restless and The Bold and the Beautiful, died on February 25th at age 91. Then James Lipton, one-time head writer of Another World, died on March 1st at 93. And then just yesterday, March 6th, Roscoe Bourne died. He is best known to Santa Barbara fans as Daniel Trask, who we won't be seeing for quite a few years. Now, back in the real world, on Santa Barbara, everyone's having lunch at La Mesa. Warren and Lionel have lunch at La Mesa, so do Cruz and Maggie, and so do Kelly, Eden, and Cece. And they all see each other. Lionel tells Warren that Sophia is going back to Italy, and they talk about Brick handling the family stocks. They're not as overly concerned about it as Lionel and Augusta were yesterday.
Well,
Maybe
Warren
because he's doing well.
Warren points out that he's actually doing a pretty good job.
Kelly keeps shooting angry looks at Maggie, and eventually she comes over, and Kelly just gets very upset with her for not shooting Peter.
Not really fair, since it was Kelly who was the one responsible, really, for Joe's death.
Yeah, that's a good point. Then Maggie later tells Warren about all that and how she had Peter in his sights and she just couldn't. She pulled the trigger when she had the chance. Eden mentions that she doesn't feel Cece will actually marry Gina tomorrow. So, not sure where that idea is coming from. Maybe it's just wishful thinking. Cece tells her just to show up and be supportive. And then Eden says, or I'll be excommunicated like Mason. Cece says, after looking for someone for 15 years and having finally found her, nothing's going to make him give up Gina. Then Eden asks CC if he's managed to look at the plans she came up with for development of the beachfront property that they stole from Lionel. He says he likes them, and he's hired some people to carry them out, which really upsets Eden because she had wanted to oversee that project herself. Then just, while she has an extra second, she asks Cruz to arrest Gina for fraud. There's a lot going on at La Mesa over that lunch hour.
Mm-hmm.
Gina arrives, and Cece gives her a humongous diamond engagement ring to apologize for it being so short. An engagement, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Then he has another present for her. He's going to give Brandon a quarter of all of his estate. Mason's share, he mentions. So, Gina really is appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm.
Warren shows up shortly after at the police station while Maggie's back at work and wants to go for like a walk or drive or something. Having just had lunch, it's probably a bad idea to go out again for a drive when you're on probation at work. So she tells him to come back after her shift. So he says he'll be there at 4:31.
Yeah.
Then when when he shows up, she kind of says, well, I don't really feel like spending the evening talking about my crisis of confidence and your feelings for Summer. So I'd rather just not do anything together. So once again, we don't know what Maggie's home situation is like. It'd be interesting to see.
I'm sure we'll find out a little more.
Kelly comes home in a great mood after another session with Marcello. And she gives Cruz a big hug, which Eden spots and is once again annoyed by. Eden has come up with another idea for Cece. Cece apparently is planning to build a hotel on the roof of the Capwell Hotel. Cece apparently is planning to build a restaurant on the roof of the Capwell Hotel.
I think that was actually Eden's idea, was to build a restaurant on the roof of the Capwell Hotel and run it.
I thought she mentioned that Cece had that idea and that she had wanted to take over that project.
I thought that was all her idea, but anyway.
So she has a whole bunch of ideas, and Cece doesn't like the idea of putting her in charge of that at all. He says no. He suggests that maybe she could open a dress shop.
Now, I actually, watching this, had a question for you, which was what you think has prompted this whole attitude on Cece's part, because it's so different than the attitude we saw him have when Eden first arrived home from Europe, and he was busy putting her in charge of all sorts of things and seemed very confident in her skills, whereas now he doesn't seem to want to back her on anything business related and just sort of sees her as a little woman who will maybe make a success of a small dress shop operation.
Yeah, I mean, the dress shop is kind of weird. But, being in charge of the Capwell Hotel, you couldn't really run something like that into the ground very quickly. Whereas being put in charge of a construction project with no experience, maybe Cece thinks that could really go badly wrong unless someone else is hand-holding her. I don't know. She points out she spent all those years at school, but he says, well, you don't really have any real experience. So, just seems like when you're that wealthy, you could just let your kids do whatever and see how they do.
Maybe he had hoped she would put in more time actually running the hotel, doing Peter Flint's old job, and maybe get experience that way before she started taking on any new ventures. Yeah,
I guess she figures Peter Flint's qualifications were forged physics teacher documents, and she went to business school for years, and it seems like putting her in the same job he'd been given as a bonus for marrying into the family isn't really, a high enough level position. So, maybe we'll build a competing restaurant across the street from the Capwell Hotel to show him.
Yeah, I can definitely. She and Cruz talked about going into business a while back when we still had the Amanda Lockridge storyline, and they were for a few episodes on the quest to find the emerald or whatever it was, and they had actually briefly talked about forming a little company too.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't heard anything about that, and since then Cruz has joined the police force. But I could definitely see them taking on some sort of enterprise in the future too.
Mm-hmm. She tells Cruz that she wants him to work on a restaurant with her.
Mm-hmm.
This is the restaurant that Cece has said no to, but she actually mentions that they worked so well together on the Amanda Lockridge Emerald project, which is funny because it's one of the three storylines that were just dropped apparently, but they think it's a success. Cruz says, well, I did enjoy chopping up that desk, but they didn't actually get an emerald out of the deal. So I'm not sure how that could be deemed a success. Unless there were a whole lot of unseen episodes while Joe was working against the Russians. Eden and Cruz were looking for an emerald, and we just never saw those episodes.
That's still not really a business, like running a business.
It's not really a business following a treasure map. Yeah, so they do. He does say as long as there's at least one Mexican dish on the menu. So we'll see what Eden's plan is if she can't get the lucrative Capwell Hotel contract. She might find another site and start her own restaurant. I mean, obviously she's really excited about that.
And I think this is laying out the groundwork for her to have a bit of more of a charged relationship with Cece. Just as Mason does. So that's where I think this might be going. So this is maybe setting up a lot of future confrontations and storylines.
The thugs that kidnap Sophia bring her to a very familiar location, a barn.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the Lockridge barn?
Is it?
Gus is the one who paid them, so maybe she said, oh, we have a farm out on the outskirts of town, bring her there.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's also the barn Lakin and Ted were living in briefly. There's the Joe barn. So there's lots of barns apparently around Santa Barbara. So
Augusta reveals herself immediately as the person who kidnapped her and tells her to go back to Italy. And they basically argue quite a bit. Augusta insisting that Sophia stop seeing Lionel, and Sophia insisting that she has no interest in seeing Lionel. So they managed to have that conversation for quite a while without either of them really hearing the other. But at one point, Sophia takes it upon herself to insult Augusta as much as she can here by saying she can't hold on to her husband. Augusta ends up slapping Sophia, and then they have a very Dynasty-style tussle in the hay, complete with differently sized stunt people, let's say, with wigs. So it was, I guess, if you like that sort of thing, that would appeal to you. It ends with Sophia punching Augusta in the jaw and Augusta losing consciousness, so much so that they actually, she gets the thugs to drive her back to the Lockridge residence, and she's still unconscious. So when the doorbell rings, Lionel's actually examining the Chinese puzzle box. So another one of the Amanda Lockridge artifacts that we thought had been possibly dropped. I'd forgotten about that one. So yeah, there must still be something intriguing there, and it must relate to the past, and it must relate to the Lockridges and maybe the Capwells. So. Yeah, so I don't think we ever quite guessed what's in there. Maybe there's more information about the emerald. Maybe that emerald storyline is still in play.
Maybe the emerald's in there.
That would be fun. Let's wrap up this emerald storyline by having it be in the box. Could happen.
Someone found that emerald, that could wrap up if someone has a storyline where they have no money, that could help with that tremendously.
Here you go, Brick, I found an emerald. What have you done for this family? So they put Augusta on the couch, and Sophia's not in disguise or anything. She's just at the front door of the Lockridge house, right next door to the Capwells. So if there were a well-placed gazebo, you could easily see her. But Augusta kind of comes to as Sophia leaves and shouts at Lionel, "After all this, I've decided I'm not going back to Italy."
I told you that ploy was going to boomerang back.
Exactly how you called it.
Yeah.
That Augusta would push Sophia back the other way. So,
and it actually does show us again what a scrapper Sophia is. That she managed 1-to-1 combat with Augusta, came out of it, and you can certainly see, how she managed to pull off Dominic doing all these amazing things for all that time too.
Yeah. It was not expected. I wasn't expecting a fight between two people on the show. So yeah, it's a wedding tomorrow. Sophia's decided to stay in town, so I wonder if she will show up at the courthouse and say, "Hey, you haven't declared me legally dead yet, and now it's too late because I'm alive."
And it'll be interesting to see just how many people are actually happy about this wedding. Apart from, Gina's delighted, obviously. She may not be when it turns out that, Lionel hasn't actually officially declared, Cece hasn't officially declared Sophia dead. And if Sophia pops out, that's going to cause all sorts of interesting things to happen.
And we'll see how Gina responds.
Yeah.
And then with the imminent possible arrival of Hank next week anyway, Gina's going to have a lot on her hands to juggle.
Yeah.
So, although I guess she's figuring, I guess she might think Cece would renege on the Brandon being in the will, but maybe she'll find out that that's permanent anyway, and then she won't be too worried about the money.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And Mason will be enjoying, Cece losing a little bit of what he thought he was going to get out of this.
It'll be interesting to see how many jabs Mason can get in before Sophia's revealed. He maybe can reveal that, he never declared her dead first, and get Cece all flustered on that, and then Sophia can show up after as a second shock to Cece.
Now, I guess we also have to see Joe's funeral at some point, do we?
No.
We
saw the aftermath of it. He was already buried and hanging around.
Yes, that's right. That's right. He was buried.
Yeah.
I'd been kind of waiting for it because they do a bit of a build-up with Ted organizing it.
And then we start on that episode right after it's happened.
Yeah, that makes sense. But,
so I think that's it for Joe, and that's it for Peter, and that's it for If Ever You're in My Arms Again. I don't think we'll see two of those three things ever again. So we will see what happens on the Friday episode, 157 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
Shazam! Welcome back to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Episode 157, originally aired Friday, March 8th, 1985. Gina is talking to her parents and Summer. So the implication is both their parents are dead. We knew that they grew up without parents. I guess we assumed they were dead, but this, I guess, confirms that. She tells them that Brandon will never have to grow up the way that they did. Or that she did. So, Gina spots Ted's photo album of Sophia, which he's bringing down to put into storage. And she asks if it's because of the wedding, and he says, yeah, there's only so long you can remember someone. Odd way of putting it. Ted tells Gina he wants to be a big brother to Brandon in the way that Channing was to him. Gina and Cece talk about Brandon, and Cece thinks that Brandon might be the one to take over Capwell Enterprises because Mason's out of the family, and Ted doesn't look like his interests lie that way. And Gina says, well, what about Kelly and Eden? Cece just poo-poos that idea immediately by saying they can't really carry on the Capwell name. So, we did say that Cece told Gina he wants to adopt Brandon, right? Was that in the last episode, or did we forget to mention that?
Well, it is here. I can't remember which episode it was.
It was either in this or the last episode. I don't remember if we mentioned it, but he does say to Gina he wants to adopt Brandon. So, I guess that's why Gina said that Brandon will never have to grow up the way she did, though. So that might have been the last episode.
Well, we also know, Gina knows that Brandon will be inheriting a share of Cece's wealth as well. So he'll be looked after monetarily, and he'll also be looked after in terms of name and reputation.
Cece mentions they're going to Rio on their honeymoon. And Gina says, "Oh, I guess that's why you wanted me to get a passport," which I found odd, since she must have had a passport to go to Paris when she to Nice when she and Santana were in Nice.
Well, he might have just said, make sure you have your passport up to date or something like that.
Lakin has got on a lot of eyeliner at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
This is a new style for her, but something that was very popular in the 80s. A lot of black eyeliner all around.
Blue eyeliner was also a thing, too.
So at 6 a.m., Augusta's been pacing already because she doesn't know where Lionel is at 6 a.m. Lakin tries to tell her she's probably overreacting. Then Augusta tells Lakin that Sophia is alive. So then that worries Lakin a little bit too.
Yeah.
But she says, does Ted know? And Augusta says, well, Ian and Mason know, so they must have told him by now.
Yeah.
So later at school, Lakin congratulates Ted. And at first he thinks it's congratulations of the wedding. And when he talks about like having a mother after all this time, he thinks she's talking about Gina. But then the penny drops, and he says, is my mother alive?
Yeah.
So Lakin is kind of shocked that she's the first one to tell him that. But this is an interesting twist on Lakin's insistence on truthfulness. Has actually not turned out as well for her as she envisioned it would be. So.
Well, I did think it was interesting, though, when she and Augusta were talking. Augusta says at one point, "Oh, you're the only one who doesn't know yet in the family that Sophia's alive." So I think Augusta is mindful of the fact that Lakin has been kept out of a lot of these conversations, and as far as the Lockridge family goes, maybe that hasn't been the best in terms of family harmony and that. So I think that's part of the reason Augusta makes the decision to tell her.
So I guess this will affect Ted. So each person who's found out in the Capwell family has found out in a slightly different way. So.
And has reacted slightly differently. And really we haven't seen Ted's full reaction yet, because this is sort of where the story actually ends. So we don't
I imagine he's going to run right to the Capwell house and demand to know what's going on. And if he encounters Kelly first, then she'll find out that way too.
Yeah.
Lionel finally comes home and tells Augusta of the pact that he and Sophia had made that time Augusta was unconscious, never to see each other again.
Yeah.
And Augusta says that if he does ever see her again in private, or look at her when they're in a room full of other people, that she will leave him.
And of course this is also going to be kind of tricky for Lionel to keep, just insofar as if Sophia does work her way back into the good graces of the Capwell family. Of course the Capwells and the Lockridges are next door neighbors, so it's actually going to be very hard to avoid her. I
see some trouble in the future for Augusta and Lionel because of that.
Definitely.
It's actually potential long-term source of trouble. So Augusta wants to know exactly how long Lionel knew that Sophia was alive, and he says, well, it was on the train. And of course, Augusta thinks he went there to meet Sophia. She says, no, I was following Dominic and his wife, and I found out they were both Sophia.
Yeah. And, when you think about it, Augusta doesn't really react as sort of strongly as I think a lot of people would to the idea of this woman also being dressed as a bearded man for months on end. But, we do have to remember that Sophia was an actress, and so, maybe disguises and theatrics weren't really out of character for her. We don't really know what she was like when she was married to Cece.
Yeah, Augusta really just took it in stride.
Yeah.
Then they talk about Brick. Lionel wants to tell Minx about Brick, and it's probably a good idea to tell him about Sophia, too, Augusta says. To tell Minx about Sophia. So Lionel would rather have the Brick conversation than the Sophia conversation. Minx comes down and drops some names, mentions knowing Howard Hughes, and then Augusta says, didn't you have a top 10 list of the women that you hated? And I think I was on that list. And Minx says, well, it's down to 9 now. And she mentions Houdini's mother as being someone she didn't care for. And number 1 on that list, of course, is Sophia Capwell. So Lionel starts out by telling Minx he doesn't like a stranger handling their finances. Minx says, I'd rather a stranger made me wealthy than a relative send me to the poorhouse. And then Lionel says, well, he's a chauffeur. And Minx says, and you're a jailbird. So Lionel and Augusta then rehearse telling Minx that Sophia is alive, and Augusta puts on an accent and pretends to be Minx. This is quite a funny scene.
Yeah.
And then Lionel goes into what I'm guessing is a dining room. We've never actually seen what's behind that door that's adjacent to the entryway, but it seems to be a dining room. We actually hear what sounds like French doors closing off. I don't think ever in the history of Santa Barbara do we ever see anything more of the Lockridge Mansion than that living room and entryway and the bedrooms. But we, imagine something appropriate. And then we just hear an exclamation and a bunch of breaking dishes. So the implication is that Minx now knows Sophia's alive and is not too happy about that.
Yeah.
Lionel's got a lot to do in this episode. He calls Mason to tell him the bad news that Sophia's decided not to leave town. And they talk about Cece and Gina marrying, and Mason says they're not married yet. So Lionel wonders what Mason has up his sleeve for that. Lionel asks Mason, I can't remember why now Lionel is so obsessed with Cece not marrying Gina.
Well, I think it's just the idea that if Sophia's going to stay in Santa Barbara, and if she gets back in with Cece, it will make it easier for Lionel and Augusta to kind of get on with their lives.
So Lionel wants Mason to make sure the wedding doesn't happen. He knows he's got something up his sleeve. Mason, of course, does not play his hand. He says, he's basically telling Lionel maybe something could happen to stop it. So he wants to know what Mason wants, implying, I'll give you some money if you stop the wedding. Later on, Mason wonders if it would be more fun for Cece to find out that he's a bigamist. So he's still not entirely sure if he plans to stop the wedding.
Yeah.
He barges into Gina's room at one point while she's getting changed, and he convinces her that he's not there to make trouble, but he would like an invitation to the wedding. Cece comes in and he's horrified that his half-dressed wife or wife-to-be is there with Mason. He asks her if he attacked her and kicks Mason out. But Gina then asks Cece to invite Mason to the wedding. She eases into that quite well, but he says no, under no circumstances.
Yeah.
So
I'm wondering if, this will have implications for what Mason is planning. If some part of his plan might hinge on that, or if plan A hinged on him being there, and maybe plan B will unfold in another way, or quite what the significance of that is, or if it's just to show us that Gina doesn't have quite as much power in the relationship as she might like to have.
He kept telling Gina she had nothing to worry about, but really I don't see that being true.
Yeah.
So then Mason talks to Lionel again, and Lionel asks again, well, what do you want? How much do you want to stop the wedding? And Mason surprises us all by saying, what I want is the Chinese puzzle box. The box we'd all forgotten about, that we thought had been dropped, that we saw Lionel with yesterday.
Yeah, Lionel was kind of playing with it. So, it was kind of interesting that coming back in, and Lionel does actually say to Mason that most of the things from the Amanda Lockwood have been sold or moved on. So, evidently the writers have come up with something around this little puzzle box.
Now, is it possible Mason knows something about the puzzle box that no one else does? Does he have, he stores all those documents. Could he have found something in Channing's possession that was a clue to what's in the puzzle box that he had in his, back pocket all these years? Our theory that maybe the emerald is in there. Be ironic if Mason ended up with the emerald.
It is kind of an interesting turn, because Mason, as sort of devious and, someone who likes to investigate things thoroughly, as much as he's like that, he hasn't really shown himself to be kind of the sort of person who would be going off on these sorts of adventures to try and uncover long-lost treasure or solve ancient mysteries. We had Eden and Cruz briefly go off on this kind of adventure, and that seems more up their alley than Mason's. So it'll be really interesting to see just what has prompted this and what Mason hopes to get out of it, and perhaps even what Mason does get out of it.
I'm excited to see what's in the puzzle box too.
Yeah.
And whether Mason gets to go to the wedding. Whether he stops the wedding.
And also how Lionel kind of deals with it as well. Is he just going to give him the puzzle box, or is he going to start thinking, well, why does Mason want this? Is he going to put more energy into solving it before he hands it over to Mason? Is he going to try to get Elizabeth back in to do some counterfeiting around that? I don't know if that's her medium for counterfeiting, but
I wonder if Gina will find out that Sophia's alive before the wedding and manage to suppress that in hopes that the wedding will go through.
That's a possibility too.
I could see her overhearing Ted or something.
Or Ted coming home and just blurting it out to the first person he sees, which, may even happen with Gina in the room. You never know.
Well, we'll find out next week when we start week 33 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye.
And I don't like a stranger handling my responsibilities.
A rather stranger made me wealthy than a relative to send me to the poorhouse.